So the Americans are training some Ukrainian troops in Poland and Germany, apparently, right? And they're training them, and supposedly these soldiers being trained in Poland and Germany are going to be, part of this August offensive. As I've said before, there isn't going to be any August offensive in Ukraine because by August this will be over. Okay, I mean it's just not going to happen. And so I've been thinking, who are these people? Are we seeing video of them? I haven't seen any video of them training, okay? But I'm guessing that these people being trained in Poland and Germany, number one, they are probably very capable guys, like top tier men, smart, physically very fit, just very capable guys, right? And number two, I have no doubt in my mind that they're not being trained for any kind of conventional warfare. They are probably being trained as some sort of special forces slash partisan group. I think that these people who are being trained in NATO and in NATO countries, rather, in Poland and Germany, these Ukrainians are going to be the spearhead, the stiffening factor of the guerrillas that the West wants to, the guerrilla movement that the West wants to create in occupied Ukraine. I think that that's the point of those guys. Those guys, they're going to be slowly dropped into Ukraine, one at a time and very separate so that they're not like a big target for the Russians. And they're going to be the people organizing insurgency in Ukraine, in conquered and occupied Ukraine. Now, this insurgency is going to be, particularly strong in central Ukraine and western Ukraine. I think that is the idea because, these people are not stupid. They understand that eastern and southern Ukraine, as it is today, well, that's predominantly Russian, and any kind of insurgency is just not going to happen there. And because you see, like here in Kharkov, the Wall Street Journal yesterday posted an article glorifying the fact that the SBU is going around Kharkov, here where I am, and arresting people for saying, pro-Russian propaganda. I mean, that's why I got picked up. Because I was accused of being a pro-Russian propagandist. And of course, I'm not. And in my interrogations, I said specifically that no, I'm not in favor of Russia or against Russia, or in favor of Ukraine or against Ukraine. I mean, I love Ukraine. That's why I live here. I could live wherever I wanted to. But, I'm just telling the truth of what things are going on. I'm not telling lies, So anyway, the Wall Street Journal basically did an article yesterday glorifying this fact that the SBU is going around arresting people for going on social media, speaking their minds, and saying that they prefer Russia over Ukraine. I mean, they're not doing anything. They weren't like doing terrorist activities or something like that. I mean, that would be justified. But if you're just mouthing off on social media, and all of a sudden, as the pictures in the Wall Street Journal show, 8 SBU guys show up heavily armed. And by the way, I recognized one of the guys there. I'm not kidding. I recognized him. 8 guys show up, heavily armed, all covered up in battle gear, right, and all the rest of it, bulletproof vests and the whole thing. What the hell is that? That's Gestapo tactics, man. And the Wall Street Journal is celebrating it. The Wall Street Journal is on the side of the SS. That's what's going on, man. Anyway. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Why am I bringing this up? Well, because you see, that guy that got arrested, who, by the way, was a lot like me. He was like a middle-aged guy, living in some apartment, right? Mouthing off on social media. And he got arrested. He hadn't committed any crime. He hadn't hurt anybody. He hadn't tried to organize anything, let alone actually put a bomb or something like that. He was just mouthing off on social media, and he got arrested by 8 guys. Well, I don't know how many guys they were who arrested him. 8 guys arrested me, I can tell you that, and shipped off for just, speaking his mind. And they have a whole unit that's doing this, and they're doing it all day long. That means that there are a lot of people here in eastern Ukraine who are not down with the Zelensky regime. I mean, that's really the way an occupying army acts now, isn't it? Yeah. There isn't going to be any insurgency in eastern Ukraine or southern Ukraine, what is now eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine, because all of this is just ethnic Russian territory, Russian speakers. Once the Russians take over, once the Russians start fixing everything up, there's going to be no opposition, and so no insurgency. But in central Ukraine and in western Ukraine, there's going to be insurgency galore. Now, this is actually, I think, extremely dangerous for NATO, because I don't think that they understand what they are doing. I mean, I know that they don't understand what they're doing. They're thinking at this time, in their pea-sized brains, they are thinking to themselves, we train these insurgent leaders and we slip them back into Ukraine because, Ukraine is lost. The Russians are going to capture the whole thing. It's just a matter of time. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, it doesn't matter. Eventually, the Russians are going to capture the whole country. NATO, NATO, we're not going to go into Ukraine, because if we were going to go in, we would have gone already. And we've already gotten a good look at the Russian military, and we want no piece of that. But insurgents, cost-effective insurgents, that's a different story now, isn't it? And so we, NATO, are not going to go into Ukraine, but we are going to send these insurgent leaders who are well-trained, well-equipped, and they are going to start the insurgency that will eat away at Russia and the Kremlin. That's the idea. Now, what are the Russians going to do once they have occupied all of Ukraine, central and western Ukraine? Well, remember I said before that the Poles want to slide it in, right? I did a video with that name. They want to get involved in the Ukrainian situation because they want a piece of Ukraine. Now, interestingly enough, over the last few days, that whole thing seems to be falling apart. Because, number one, it's very clear that the Poles were assembling some sort of military task force that they were going to call peacekeepers, and they were going to go into Western Ukraine to, keep the peace in Western Ukraine, okay? And that idea got nixed. That's fact number two. It got nixed. Those guys are not crossing the border. And the United States must have told them, you're not going to go in there. Because you create a huge vulnerability whereby the United States might wind up in a head-to-head war with Russia. Because Poland goes in with peacekeepers, the Russians hit those Polish peacekeepers, and all of a sudden Article 5 is triggered, and you're embarrassing the United States if we don't go in, so you're arm twisting us into going in? Fuck that. I mean, somebody in the Pentagon has some brains and figure out what's what, and nix that idea. Because, again, if the Poles were going to go in with peacekeepers, they would have gone in already. But also what's happened, apart from those two facts, the third fact is that the Poles all of a sudden realize that, they can't really afford all this shit that they're doing. They can't afford all of these Ukrainian refugees. They can't afford sending all these weapons to Ukraine. They can't really afford setting up this military task force that has, kind of like nothing to do all of a sudden, right? They need cash. And so they started saying to the Norwegians of all people, hey, Norway, you should give us half the money because of all the excess money, excess profits that you're making off of this gas situation. And the Norwegians were like, who the hell are you, man? Get the hell away from me, man. Dude, it's my money. Go away, And the Poles started, knocking on the door of the EU. The Poles started knocking on everybody's door to get some moolah, right? And all of a sudden they realized, this is not going to be a profitable endeavor. And they even went so far as to try to set up the Ukrainian reconstruction out of Warsaw. Why would they want to do it out of Warsaw if not to siphon money off of the whole enterprise? That was the goal. Yeah, they wanted to, have it in Warsaw so they could figure out a way how to get some cash out of this reconstruction fund. The Poles are desperate to get their hands on the the foreign currency reserves that have been confiscated, the Russian foreign currency reserves that have been confiscated by the European Union. They're desperate to get their hands on it, right? And the European Central Bank, as I understand it, is the one slapping their hands away. I mean, the Poles are broke. I mean, the Poles hate the Russians, but they're broke. Or not broke per se, but they're not doing that well financially. This whole endeavor has cost them a pretty penny. And so all of a sudden, over the issue of money, this eternal friendship between Poland and Ukraine lasted all of like 3 weeks or something like that. It's starting to fall apart, right? But see, that makes it all the more tempting for when Putin and the Kremlin, once they have captured all of Ukraine, they're going to say to Poland, we're having a lot of trouble in Western Ukraine. We're having a lot of trouble with these insurgents. Poland, as a measure of goodwill, why don't you help us keep the peace in Lviv and Galicia? Would you like that? And all of NATO is going to be against it. All of the European Union is going to be against it. But the Poles, they're not going to be able to help themselves. And they're going to go for it. They're going to go for it. They're going to say, yes, Mr. Putin, we will help you keep the peace in Lviv and Galicia. And they'll go in with troops. And they'll have like some sort of rotating military arrangement. I'm just spitballing here. But they have a rotating military arrangement, a peacekeeping, operation with the Russians, and the Russians slowly peel back. And they just sort of like push the whole Lviv, Galicia thing into Poland's lap. And that's where all these insurgency leaders, trained by NATO, trained in Poland, that's where they congregate. Because they start looking at the Poles as the conquerors and oppressors, more than the Russians. And that's the start of Poland's Vietnam. I'm telling you, I don't know the mechanics. I mean, what I'm telling you here is sort of like the idea I have at this time with the current state of play. It could be radically different, but the ultimate aim, the ultimate point rather, is that Western Ukraine will become Poland's Vietnam. It's inevitable, see? And it's inevitable, why? For two reasons. Number one, the Poles, they lust after Lviv and Galicia in a way that's frankly unhealthy, okay? They want those territories in that city so bad. And the problem is that, see, the city of Lviv is no longer a Polish city. It hasn't been a Polish city in 80 years, okay? Lviv is a Ukrainian city, full of Ukrainians. Not Poles. The Poles who used to live in Lviv, they're long gone, they're long dead. And their descendants, they're far away in Poland or elsewhere. Lviv is a Ukrainian city, but in their minds, in the minds of the Poles, Lviv is still Polish and they want it. And that's why they also want Galicia. And they want it desperately. So that's reason number one. And the second reason is because all of those insurgents that NATO is currently training, because that's who they are training now. Don't think that they are training battlefield officers for combat against the Russians, right? They are training insurgents. That's who they are training right now. Well, these NATO-trained insurgents, they might have been in eastern Ukraine and figured out what's what and realized that nobody wants to join their insurgency. The same in southern Ukraine, nobody wants to join their insurgency. They might have done some things in central Ukraine, but when they see the issue of Poland in Lviv, which is where all of the neo-Nazi banderistas come from, it's their spiritual home, they are going to go there and they're going to make it a nightmare for the Poles. It's Polish ambition and the neo-Nazi banderista inability to do their job of insurgency anywhere else except there. Only there. Okay? Or from your point of view, over here. Only there in Western Ukraine. That's the only place. And so that's why I'm positive. I mean, I don't know how it's going to happen. But that's the direction that we're going in. Poland's Vietnam.